Who would you consider as the most badass person in history? Most of it he makes up himself, including a vast network of fictitious sub-spies, who are all given allowances by the Germans. Garbo, that vital convoy. My agent couldn't report on it because he fell deathly ill. Garbo, a bit later, I'm sorry to report that agent died of his illness. He left a widow behind. Garbo, a bit later on, a posthumous commendation for my heroic agent, and a pension for his grieving widow? Why thank you, I'll make sure she gets it. Edit, yes, the pension for the fictitious spy's widow was really paid by the German government, and yes, Garbo pocketed it. He also got the Germans to pay him a salary as their spy, and got them to pay the salaries, straight to Garbo, for all of Garbo's fictitious spies as well. Garbo not only screwed over the German military with his double agent ploy, he made bank in the process. Juan Pujol Garcia aka Garbo. Guy was an educated, die-hard anti-fascist Spaniard during World War II. Approached the British offering to spy for them, they turn him down. So he approaches the Germans offering to spy for them, and he's accepted. He's given a mission to go to England and report on various things, but he can't gain access, so instead he just goes to the library and gives the Germans a steady stream of book facts mixed with nonsense. The British, who have broken German codes by this time, notice that the Germans have a spy who is talking nonsense and causing the Germans to waste resources looking for non-existent convoys. So, they have a change of heart and accept Garcia as an double agent, and he becomes, simply, one of the world's greatest bullshit artists. MI6 feeds him some stuff to relay, but most of it he makes up himself, including a vast network of fictitious sub-spies, who are all given allowances by the Germans. His work helps fool the Germans into thinking there is a large army group prepared to invade Calais after the diversionary attack on Normandy. Hitler is so convinced of this that he prevents quite a lot of his reserves from reinforcing Normandy. Tens of thousands of lives are likely saved, if not hundreds of thousands, all because one man had the balls to walk into a German embassy, offer to be a spy, and then feed the Nazis a steady stream of bullshit. And they never figured it out. In the waning days of World War II, Juan Pujol Garcia received the Iron Cross from the Nazis for his services as a spy. Senator from Hawaii. World War II vet. Japanese-American who had to prove himself every step of the way through the European theater of operations. And to me, an honest-to-goodness hero. In 1943, when the U.S. Army dropped its enlistment ban on Japanese Americans, Inouye curtailed his pre-medical studies at the University of Hawaii and enlisted in the Army. 6. He volunteered to be part of the segregated All-Nisei 442nd Regimental Combat Team. This Army formation was mostly made up of second-generation Japanese Americans from Hawaii and the mainland. Inouye was promoted to sergeant within his first year, and he was assigned as a platoon sergeant. He served in Italy in 1944 during the Rome Arno campaign before his regiment was transferred to the Vosges Mountains region of France, where he spent 2 weeks in the battle to relieve the Lost Battalion, a battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment that was surrounded by German forces. He received a battlefield commission to second lieutenant for his actions there, becoming the youngest officer in his regiment. At one point while he was leading an attack, a shot struck him in the chest directly above his heart, but the bullet was stopped by the $2 silver he happened to have stacked in his shirt pocket. He continued to carry the coins throughout the war in his shirt pocket as good luck charms, until he lost them shortly before the battle in which he lost his arm. On April 21, 1945, Lt. Inouye was grievously wounded while leading an assault on a heavily defended ridge near San Terenzo in Liguria, Italy, called the Colle Musatello. The ridge served as a strong point of the German fortifications known as the Gothic Line, the last and most unyielding line of German defensive works in Italy. As he led his platoon in a flanking maneuver, 3 German machine guns opened fire from covered positions 40 yards away, pinning his men to the ground. Inouye stood up to attack and was shot in the stomach. Ignoring his wound, he proceeded to attack and destroy the first machine gun nest with hand grenades and his Thompson submachine gun. When informed of the severity of his wound, he refused treatment and rallied his men for an attack on the second machine gun position, which he successfully destroyed before collapsing from blood loss. As his squad distracted the third machine gunner, Inouye crawled toward the final bunker, coming within 10 yards. As he raised himself on his left elbow and cocked his right arm to throw his last hand grenade, a German soldier saw Inouye and fired a 30mm Skiaspecher antipersonnel rifle grenade from inside the bunker, which struck Inouye directly on his right elbow. The high explosive grenade failed to detonate, saving Inouye from instant death but amputating most of his right arm at the elbow, except for a few tendons and a flap of skin, via blunt force trauma. Despite this gruesome injury, Inouye was again saved from likely death due to the blunt, low-velocity grenade tearing the nerves in his arm unevenly and incompletely, which involuntarily squeezed the grenade tightly via a reflex arc instead of going limp and dropping it at Inouye's feet. However, this still left him crippled, in terrible pain, under fire with minimal cover and staring at a live grenade clenched in a fist that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. Inouye's horrified soldiers moved to his aid, but he shouted for them to keep back out of fear his severed fist would involuntarily relax and drop the grenade. As the German inside the bunker began hastily reloading his rifle with regular full metal jacket ammunition, replacing the wood-tipped rounds used to propel rifle grenades, Inouye quickly pried the live hand grenade from his useless right hand and transferred it to his left. The German soldier had just finished reloading and was aiming his rifle to finish him off when Inouye threw his grenade through the narrow firing slit, killing the German. Stumbling to his feet with the remnants of his right arm hanging grotesquely at his side and his Thompson in his offhand, braced against his hip, Inouye continued forward, killing at least one more German before suffering his fifth and final wound of the day, in his left leg, which finally halted his one-man assault for good and sent him tumbling unconscious to the bottom of the ridge. He awoke to see the worried men of his platoon hovering over him. His only comment before being carried away was to gruffly order them back to their positions, saying nobody called off the war. TLDR, blew up several German machine gun bunkers with mad grenades as he got shot in the stomach, lost an arm, and had to throw left-handed. Then told the rest of the platoon to keep going because shit wasn't done with. Desmond Doss. An army medic in World War II who was constantly belittled and abused by his battalion and superiors for refusing to use a weapon as it went against his beliefs. Then, when he landed in Okinawa and more than half of his battalion were shredded by Japanese machine gun fire, Desmond Doss crawled through the dirt over the course of several days to as many of his injured allies as he could and dragged them all the way back to the 40-foot cliff they had scaled up from, then lowered them to safety. Some of these injured men were lying 15 feet from the enemy machine gun itself, and all the while Doss wore his medic helmet, which stood out like a giant bullseye on a battlefield where the Japanese soldiers were ordered to kill doctors first to crush morale. In the end he had saved the lives of 75 men, and survived with an arm fracture from a sniper round and several pieces of shrapnel embedded in his body from when he tried to kick a grenade away from him and his men. He is the only soldier without a gun to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Edit, *, the first conscientious objector to be awarded the Medal of Honor, there have been others since. There's actually been 3 soldiers who were conscientious objectors that were awarded the Medal of Honor. Desmond Doss was the first. The army credited him with over 100 lives saved when they were first pushed off the cliff, but Desmond contended that it couldn't have been more than 50, so they split the difference on his MO citation. But the 75 men saved was just the beginning. Multiple times Desmond would crawl out 200 to 300 yards to render aid to wounded soldiers, many times under constant machine gun fire. A couple days later 4 men were cut down assaulting a strongly defended cave, and he advanced through a shower of grenades to within 8 yards of enemy forces where he rendered aid and then made 4 trips back and forth bringing the men to safety. Another time, a soldier was severely wounded from fire from a cave, So Desmond crawled to within 25 feet of the enemy, rendered aid, and then crawled with him back 100 feet to friendly lines. After staying out in the open during a night attack, hoping he would be mistaken by enemy forces as one of their own infiltrating, he went around administering aid to wounded soldiers until he kicked a grenade away and was wounded in both legs. Rather than call another aid men from cover to help him, he cared for his own injuries and waited 5 hours before litter bearers reached him. The 2 litter bearers and Das got caught in an enemy attack, and Desmond say a soldier more critically wounded than him, so he rolled off the stretcher and ordered the 2 stretcher bearers to take the wounded soldier instead. He then gets shot in the arm, suffering the compound fracture, so he binds a rifle stock to his arm and then crawls 300 yards over rough terrain to the aid station. Desmond Doss is the most badass of badasses. Viking historian here. Sorry to burst your bubble, but unfortunately it's extremely likely that the lone Norse axeman is a work of pure fiction. The whole battle is extremely sketchy in terms of events due to the validity of the sources. Most were written decades, if not centuries, after the fact, and were an attempt to make the events sound more exciting and worthy of a story. In the original Anglo-Saxon chronicles, the mention of the battle is a mere footnote in comparison to Hastings, which was considered the more important event. In later revisions they added more context to almost justify Harold's defeat at Hastings, still weary from an epic clash with Hardrada. In even later editions there is mention of Harold and Hardrada speaking before the battle commences, which seems ludicrous considering Harold had caught Hardrada unawares and was supposed to be a surprise attack. We're not even sure was an actual bridge at the time of the battle. There was certainly one during the 13th century, but before then it could have merely been a simple ford. Plus the idea of marching around 10,000 soldiers across a narrow bridge that acts as a choke point for one man is a bit of a silly tactic. Can't definitively say it didn't happen, but neither can we really prove that it did either, but regardless still makes for an entertaining story. Slightly smiling face. Definitely Major Hugh Thompson. I'm sure there are people who have done similarly brave things, but not that I know about. In 1968, Thompson managed to stop the My Lai massacre almost single-handedly. He arrived after many civilians had already been killed, and couldn't understand how they had died. After realizing his fellow American soldiers were firing on unarmed civilians, he landed his helicopter between the Vietnamese and the soldiers. He then told the troops that if they continued to do what they were doing, he and his crew would open fire on them. After getting back to base, he filed a complaint about what he had witnessed. His complaint was covered up, and he was shunned as a traitor. It wasn't until 1998 that the army acknowledged he did the right thing. It's common to be brave in war when you know that you'll be lauded as a hero. It's another thing entirely to do it knowing you'll be seen as a traitor. He turned against his troops and country to protect innocent lives, despite what it would cost him, and I think that's about as brave as you can get. John Brown is one of, if not the greatest Americans in U.S. history IMHO. He was born into an abolitionist family in 1800. He witnessed an enslaved boy his own age being beaten with a shovel at age 12 and devotes his entire life to freeing the enslaved. Brown had countless failed jobs as an adult. Loses his first wife during childbirth. Remarries and has a total of 20 children, between both marriages. Only 6 of his children would go on to outlive him. Moves between multiple states forming/maintains additional stops on the Underground Railroad. Brown joined his sons in Kansas to keep the territory from turning into a pro-slave state via Missouri's border ruffians. This war between Kansas and Missouri is known as Bleeding Kansas. John Brown suffered illness, poverty, the death of a wife and multiple children. He spent years studying military tactics and positioned himself around the U.S. in order to assist in the freeing of the enslaved. He and 21 men raided Harper's Ferry in 1859. Brown's plan was to initiate a slave revolt in southern states by taking over the United States Arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. It has been called the dress rehearsal for, or tragic prelude to, the Civil War. John Brown has been portrayed as a madman. Not only would he give his life to the cause, but he saw the enslaved and disenfranchised as equals. People to share a meal with. People to welcome into his home. He took the US head on to fight for a just cause and is rarely mentioned in history classes. Thinking face. Okay, this was who I was going to add to this list. You missed some of the crazy details about her though. When the envoy from the country that had killed her husband, the Drevlians, arrived to request she marry their prince, she told them not to come by horse or by foot but to stay in their boat, and her people would carry it as a great palanquin to honor them. They tossed the whole boat into a ditch and buried them alive. She then sent word to the Drevlians and invited all of their noble sons and the prince she was to marry to come to her. She offered them all baths when they arrived and then locked the doors and burned the bathhouse to the ground. She then sent word to the Drevlians to request a funeral feast be prepared in memory of her husband. They put together a massive feast with tons of meat in the city where he died. She waited until all of the Drevlians were drunk and then killed them all, about 5,000 people. Now on to the burning of a city. It was not a village, it was the damned capital. Her army laid siege to the city, and after some time, she offered to lift the siege in exchange for tribute, 3 pigeons from each house in the city. The city leaders gladly paid such a small request and thought the matter finished. Olga's troops tied coals to all of the birds' feet and released them. The birds all returned to their nests/homes and the city caught fire all at once. She weaponized fucking pigeons in order to raise a city. From Wiki, long read but highlights the badassness. The Drevlians, emboldened by their success in ambushing and killing the king, sent a messenger to Olga proposing that she marry his murderer, Prince Mal. 20 Drevlian negotiators boated to Kiev to pass along their king's message and to ensure Olga's compliance. They arrived in her court and told the queen why they were in Kiev, to report that they had slain her husband, and that Olga should come and marry their prince Mal. 14. Olga responded. Your proposal is pleasing to me, indeed, my husband cannot rise again from the dead. But I desire to honor you tomorrow in the presence of my people. Return now to your boat, and remain there with an aspect of arrogance. I shall send for you on the morrow, and you shall say, we will not ride on horses nor go on foot, carry us in our boat. And you shall be carried in your boat. When the Drevlians returned the next day, they waited outside Olga's court to receive the honor she had promised. When they repeated the words she had told them to say, the people of Kiev rose up, carrying the Drevlians in their boat. The ambassadors believed this was a great honor, as if they were being carried by palanquin. The people brought them into the court, where they were dropped into a trench that had been dug the day before under Olga's orders, where the ambassadors were buried alive. It is written that Olga bent down to watch them as they were buried and inquired whether they found the honor to their taste. 14. Olga then sent a message to the Drevlians that they should send their distinguished men to her in Kiev, so that she might go to their prince with due honor. 14. The Drevlians, unaware of the fate of the first diplomatic party, gathered another party of men to send the best men who governed the land of Deriva. 14. When they arrived, Olga commanded her people to draw them a bath and invited the men to appear before her after they had bathed. When the Drevlians entered the bathhouse, Olga had it set on fire from the doors, so that all the Drevlians within burned to death. 14. Olga sent another message to the Drevlians, this time ordering them to prepare great quantities of meat in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him. 14. When Olga and a small group of attendants arrived at Igor's tomb, she did indeed weep and hold a funeral feast. The Drevlians sat down to join them and began to drink heavily. When the Drevlians were drunk, she ordered her followers to kill them, and went about herself egging on her retinue to the massacre of the Drevlians. 14. According to the primary chronicle, 5,000 Drevlians were killed on this night, but Olga returned to Kiev to prepare an army to finish off the survivors. The initial conflict between the armies of the two nations went very well for the forces of Kievan Rus, who won the battle handily and drove the survivors back into their cities. Olga then led her army to Iskir-Asan, what is today Korostan, the city where her husband had been slain, and laid siege to the city. The siege lasted for a year without success, when Olga thought of a plan to trick the Drevlians. She sent them a message, "Why do you persist in holding out? All your cities have surrendered to me and submitted to tribute, so that the inhabitants now cultivate their fields and their lands in peace. But you had rather died of hunger, without submitting to tribute." 15. The Drevlians responded that they would submit to tribute, but that they were afraid she was still intent on avenging her husband. Olga answered that the murder of the messengers sent to Kiev, as well as the events of the feast night, had been enough for her. She then asked them for a small request, "Give me 3 pigeons, and 3 sparrows from each house." 15. The Drevlians rejoiced at the prospect of the siege ending for so small a price, and did as she asked. Olga then instructed her army to attach a piece of sulfur bound with small pieces of cloth to each bird. At nightfall, Olga told her soldiers to set the pieces aflame and release the birds. They returned to their nests within the city, which subsequently set the city ablaze. As the primary chronicle tells it, there was not a house that was not consumed, and it was impossible to extinguish the flames, because all the houses caught fire at once. 15. As the people fled the burning city, Olga ordered her soldiers to catch them, killing some of them and giving the others as slaves to her followers. She left the remnant to pay tribute.